which is probably more interesting to a lot of you than the Sustainable Darkroom, if I'm being honest. So I'll talk about my own work after the Sustainable Darkroom. So that means it forces you to sit through this part of the talk. But yeah, so I'm going to talk about the Sustainable Darkroom, and then after that, I'm going to talk about my own work, so kind of commission work, residencies, and then some professional practice stuff. Because often when I do university talks, they don't give a damn about like any of the themes of my work, like climate change and stuff. Instead, it's more just like, how do I actually make money when I graduate? So I'll try and include some stuff on that as well. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to begin with a reading from a research paper that I'm writing for the Sustainable Darkroom. It's quite intense, so I apologize in advance. It's also got some kind of violent imagery in it. It's like violence to animals specifically. So if any of you are kind of put off by that, then do leave the room. All right, so I'm taking this picture. I'm taking this picture with a camera. I'm taking this picture with a roll of film, the image seared onto its surface. I'm taking this picture with dev, stop, fix. I'm taking this picture with plastic, silver, gelatin. I'm taking this picture with plastic spun from oil drilled from the earth. I'm taking this picture with the hands of the worker stained black with sweat, with the fish and the gannet killed by spillage as the pipeline bursts and oozed, with the algae and plants from when dinosaurs stomped the earth all pressured over millions of years to become stinking, black, sludge, burn and release into emissions that will shutter snap. And I am taking this picture with silver picked and scraped and pulled from the earth. I'm taking this picture with the indigenous people violently dragged from their land, shot at, enslaved, scorned, for the mine to be torn open, with the child labourer forced into the mine to buy shoes for his sister to walk 5 miles to school with the toxic dust filling their lungs. Average life expectancy 35. And I'm taking this picture of the dying star that exploded into supernova and striking hot silver was formed. And I am taking this picture. I'm taking this picture of gelatin crushed and heated and melted from the bones of a cow chewing happily on feed. Its rump shot into a trailer, the trailer driven down the road, the cow led out, up a ramp, a bolt gun aimed to its head till its shapen collapse and its throat is slit, its body torn apart, the skeleton plucked. So fresh, so clean. And I am taking this picture of the climate that is in breakdown, the weather that is changing, the storms that are braying, the clouds that are swirling, the temperatures that are rising, the droughts and the floods and the wildfires that are killing, the crops that are failing, the wildlife disappearing, the seas that are rising, a planet in extinction. So I am taking this picture, you are taking this picture, we are taking this picture, Earth is taking this picture, you are taking this, I am taking this, we are taking picture, they are, we are, she is, he is, us are taking this picture, this picture, this picture, this picture. No photographer is isolated, no photographer is alone, no picture is taken alone. This is the basis of an ecological photographic practice, and this is what I will be talking about today. So, hello everyone, my name's Ed, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Sustainable Darkroom. As I said, we'll be doing this talk in two halves, so firstly talking about the Sustainable Darkroom, and then secondly talking about my practice and my commercial work and how to make money and all those kind of things. The Sustainable Darkroom is essentially an organization which operates on and promotes the principles of what you call ecologically conscious, kind of sustainable, or sustainable is a bit of a controversial word, photography. And it's not just about the way we work, so it's not just like, oh, let's go and recycle our plastic and all that kind of stuff, but also like the way we actually think and exist and what a photograph actually is. So it's not just like this kind of let's all join hands and put our recycling in the recycling bin kind of thing, but really trying to transform what photography is, what photography means. So the organization was founded by Hannah Fletcher, and it's run by her, myself, and Alice Kazanav, who's doing a PhD in photographic silver at Cliffs. And within this, we support research, residencies, we publish books, and generally help photographers like you guys kind of exist in a world that allows for more kind of ecologically regenerative or sustainable practice. So any of you that are interested, you know, I want to stress that it's not like a product. I'm not trying to like sell you, you know, like a biodegradable piece of film or anything like that. But it's very much an idea that you can all contribute to in this room and work towards. So if you are interested, do get in touch and don't feel kind of put off by any of it, or apply for our residencies, that kind of stuff. So they can see, So I would like you all to just think like, what is your major kind of concern in photography? It doesn't have to be about the environment, it can just be like my composition, or how to actually make money after I've spent £30,000 on a degree, all those kind of things. So just write that down, and then throughout this talk, maybe you can reflect on that towards the end. But yeah, so within that, this is our kind of manifesto. It's obviously not just 5 words, but the manifesto of the Sustainable Darkroom is like this. So firstly, accessibility. So trying to make our stuff as affordable and as accessible as possible, which is obviously important in the kind of cost of living crisis and all that kind of stuff. Inclusivity. So working across all different kind of formats of photography, also people's, including different kind of philosophies. So a lot of this stuff is based on material extraction. So silver extraction, oil extraction, plastic, all these kind of things, which are very much related to the kind of exploitation of the global south, etc., etc. So really trying to kind of view things from those viewpoints instead of just a kind of like white savior kind of narrative, I guess. Transparency, so researching and making ecologically informed decisions across all platforms. So really just trying to avoid being funded or being used as a kind of greenwashing exercise. So, if Coca-Cola like offered us millions of pounds to like do a promotion for them, I guess we'd have to turn it down, unfortunately. Although maybe I wouldn't, but Hannah definitely would. Good practice and care. So obviously just thinking about our relations with not just non-humans, so not just trying to be, save the whales kind of thing, but also humans as well. And valuing the kind of resources in photography. So not like using a ton of stuff, generating a ton of waste, etc., etc. And then finally sharing our ethos. These are all very generic kind of principles, I guess, which you probably all can apply throughout your kind of lives and your work. But yeah, sharing our ethos is obviously really important. So helping to create a kind of community that exists in parallel to the mainstream, because photography is so tied to consumption and so tied to extraction that trying to like just create a space where people can actually exist and make money and make work and kind of have a profile without having to engage with these kind of destructive systems is important to us. The way I got into this was writing 2 research papers. So my dissertation was actually quite important to my kind of future. So try not to ignore it too much if any given pages. So on the right there is the ecology of grain, and that was my master's thesis, and that was an analysis of animal gelatin in film. So for any of you that shoot film, it's coated with beef gelatin, specifically beef gelatin, because they can't use other gelatins aren't as reliable. So it was the kind of first ever insight into the world of gelatin in analog photography, and then staring into the Kafka to reveal your future, which is a kind of hypothetical future for photography. Like, what could photography look like if it was constructed around these kind of principles of sustainability and regenerative kind of methods, I suppose. So they're free to read online if you want to depress yourself and look at loads of pictures of cow bones and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm going to now start the talk properly. So you, yes, all of you, budding film photographers with your Canon AE1, the shutter sticking once too often, and you over there, the seasoned darkroom practitioner with your Leica firmly tucked in its leather case, and you too, of course, the alternative processor, put down your brushes, come one, come all, for a limited time only. Well, about 10 years, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Welcome to the analog renaissance. So in 2019, when I wrote The Ecology of Grain, I was wrong. Like the alternative photography guy that I am, I refuted the idea that there was an analog renaissance. A renaissance that was advocated by talking heads, industry, podcasts, all these kind of people as film photography enjoyed and continues to enjoy a flourishing popularity amongst the millennial generation and now Generation Z, or Z, however you want to say it. Analog that was once thought dead and gone is now alive and with purpose. It's a corpse that's been kind of revived and reanimated and is shuffling down the street in a Kodak cap, arms aimed for the jugular of digital photography. Of course, digital will always remain dominant, but analog is not fading away. As companies respond with pop-up darkroom kits, at-home development kits, in an attempt to kind of reflect the nature of this resurgence, just don't look behind the pop-up darkroom curtain. Because if you do, you'll see that we are currently living in the greatest existential crisis to humanity. So a crisis that's not just threatening our natural systems, but society at large. You, me, everybody in this talk, everyone you've ever known, unless they're dead already, has or will or continues to be affected by ecological crisis. So you only have to look at the recent wildfires that raged across Europe, North America, currently in Canada, I think, the incredible kind of retreat of Arctic sea ice, the continued collapse of biodiversity. I think in this country, 75% wildlife loss that we're facing, all the displacement of peoples, especially in the global south, as their ecologies are kind of ruined by desertification, which is resulting in mass migration that we've never seen the likes of before. We're talking entire continents, entire countries trying to migrate into kind of more stable areas in the global north. And at the Sustainable Darkroom, we believe that these crises are not perpetuated by some innate human selfishness, this kind of idea that humans are a virus or that humans are inherently evil, this kind of like, David Attenborough often puts forward this narrative that humans are just inherently rapacious and evil. But we instead try and point the finger at kind of global economic and social systems that have now dominated for centuries. So look at what you want, but the kind of pursuit of capital, unlimited growth, aggressive industrialism, plantation agriculture, colonialism, post-colonialism, consumerism, all of these structures and agents are perpetuated crisis. Mass consumption for maximum profit, all facilitated by the continued exploitation of humans and non-humans, typically in the global south, as I mentioned, considered inanimate resources, not living beings. So within photography, envisioning a kind of genuine, sustainable departure from the old might seem quite radical because photography is so tied to these systems. It seems kind of crazy and idealistic, and that's because it is. But what is more radical to my mind is ignoring the unfolding of these crises whilst our favorite news bleeds in the background. So whilst we wait in anticipation for like the latest episode of House of Dragons, The Last of Us, etc., the devastating floods in Pakistan, the desertification of Central Africa, the slash and burn clearance of the Amazon, all of these are kind of drowned out by the deafening roar of the latest multi-award-winning Rotten Tomatoes, 98% wildfires raging, audience favorite, glaciers melting, Oscar nominee, forest clearing, BAFTA-winning, rivers poisoning, record-breaking, extinction, ITVB reality TV series. All of which, for those of us that are attuned to these ecological crises, make us ask again, is there an alternative? And the answer is yes. So we're trying to come from a point of like, no more catastrophism, no more duck and cover, no more hiding behind our lenses as we wait for the Great Pacific Garbage Patch to come through the doors and drown us all. No more. The time of catastrophism, the time of climate burnout, all of these things is over. The time of photographic change has come. But how do we follow an ecological ethic in photography when photography is so tied to these kind of systems? So as an art form, photography is slave to endless upgrades in line with technological progress. So if we think like Canon 5D Mark 5, 6, 7, whatever kind of 5D, we think of the new drone, all of these things. And it's an art form that is not only produces, but is completely necessitated on the production of toxic waste, devastating to humans and non-humans alike. It's also a art form which produces millions upon millions of consumable images every single second, so it's completely kind of systems of industrialism. So it's not necessarily a grand solution, the Sustainable Darkroom. We're not going to like grab 47s and like storm the steps of Kodak in Ilford and demand that they recycle their plastic cups or anything like that. But instead, it's this kind of slow movement. So if this is a reel of film, we're very much in the kind of first, second frame maybe at this point. And I believe that as our institutions fail to address climate change, fail to mass consumption, fail to challenge endless growth, fail to represent those left ignored, those left behind, we must look to the kind of grassroots. We must reclaim the photographic commons. So within image making, instead of clasping our hands and hoping Ilford or Canon or whoever's going to come out with some biodegradable camera to save the day, instead working together very much from this kind of grassroots perspective. So what that means within the Sustainable Darkroom, the kind of lens we look through, is something called, through many different terms, but the most easy to understand, I guess, would be entanglement. I've come across the term entanglement before, and that image was generated by AI when I put in that phrase. So a kind of weird octopus camera hybrid. But to put it simply, entanglement is being aware that we are embodied within this thoroughly physical and material world. So essentially, everything is relational, everything is connected. So within photography, there's me surrounded by the different elements in photography. This means that we're not these kind of standalone individuals acting in a world of separate parts, but instead we live in a world where everything is connected and sustained through ever-changing relationships. So every time you take a picture, you're not just affected, you're not just on your own taking that picture, but you're affecting all these different materials and living beings and non-living beings. So as you can see with analog photography, like the cow, the oil, the silver, the water, all of those are interacting every single time you press that shutter. Similarly with digital photography, the lithium, the child that mined that lithium, the fish that got poisoned when that lithium was mined, all of those things are interacting every single time you use your camera. I'm not saying it's your responsibility or that you should feel guilty for it, but it's just something to be aware of, and that's how we kind of work through it. So in the Sustainable Darkroom, by viewing things in this way, essentially things that were previously seen as kind of lifeless, like a roll of film, like sitting perfectly on the shelf, or a pack of animal gelatin that you're going to use to coat your own cyanotypes or whatever. Instead, through this kind of lens, they're no longer just appearing on a shelf for your purchase, but have a material past, a present, and a future. So, for example, with gelatin, it's not just this thing that's in your roll of film, but it's actually derived from a living, thinking, feeling animal that's now in the form to make your photography possible. So the average photographer in this room probably considers a roll of film as it goes through their camera, and you can hear that noise, like kind of nice noise as you advance the film, or when you put an SD card in your camera. But do they consider that it's not this isolated thing, but it very much has this past, this present, and this future, even after you've used it, roll of film? When you die, it's still going to exist, and what happens to all of that after you die? Because these things have a much longer life than you all do in this room. So therefore, what we do is kind of change the meaning of not only what a photograph is, but what a photographer is. So a photographer is no longer just this individual that's going out into the world and capturing stuff, but it's a mesh of this entire process. So you, the cow, the water, the trees, the light, all of these things are the photographer and the photographer's being, essentially. So that's the kind of that we work from. But if this sounds kind of abstract, I can put it into more kind of literal terms of animal gelatin. So there you can see gelatin being produced on the left using the carcasses of cows. Apologies, I should have warned about image in advance. But basically, if we start to analyze our photographic systems through this lens, then we can see the kind of environmental impact and stuff that they have. So within my PhD, my master's thesis, I was able to, very roughly, because I'm not a scientist and I'm not good with numbers, but very roughly kind of work out that for consumer stocks, it was about 869 cow skeletons that we used to coat the entire year's worth of film. So it's not that many when you compare it to like the consumption of McDonald's hamburgers, which I think are consumed at like 100 a second or something crazy like that. So anyway, but that's the kind of way we can then begin to analyze these things and start to look at the connections and how we might be able to improve them. So we see a problem, we analyze it in this kind of material way, and then we can think about how to replace it. So very obvious examples like developers, we can start to make our film developers out of plants, basically. So similarly, Alice Kazanav, she is doing a PhD in Goldsmiths in London in photographic silver, and she's using these kind of analytical techniques to look at the history of silver. So basically, looking at where silver was extracted and then ended up in photographic film. So, for example, a lot of the silver that was extracted by Kodak was from indigenous territories, and then that film was then turned into moving image pictures about, you know, the kind of cowboys and Indians. So often indigenous people being slaughtered in these films using the silver that was extracted from their territories. So this kind of horrible, violent, but very interesting kind of material connections that exist within photography. So in very practical terms, the way we've distilled this is it used to be 4 R's, but now it's 7 R's. So these are kind of operating principles which you're then able to apply to your own practice. It's a bit cringe and it's a bit like, you know, kind of neoliberal World Wildlife Fund, but it is useful to have these. So I'm just going to go through each one. So refuse is probably the first one, which I added recently. And basically, that's just taking this kind of ecologically critical stance about photographic materials. So it's not like you have to be like, I will never shoot film again, like, and like firebomb Kodak or anything like that. But essentially just adopting this kind of critical mindset of the materials that you use and the effect that they have in the world. Rework, so reworking systems in our photographic practice. So for example, changing the way we dispose of stuff. In this case, this is the photographic garden. So we built a garden, there was a bunch of these different planters. And then instead of buying the various elements to make our own developers, we grew everything that we needed. Obviously, it grew way too much, so I'd recommend if you're going to build a photographic garden, make sure they're edible plants. But yeah, that's just an example of kind of reworking. Or the way you dispose of your chemistry. So here we have somebody that's evaporating their chemistry and then adding the sludge after it's been evaporated into their compost, and then they have this very specific type of worm that can digest it. But yeah, anyway, stuff like that. Repurposing, so skipping ahead of me. So repurposing existing materials for different processes. So really obvious stuff, but like reworking old cameras, making cameras out of waste. So this is a camera, well, that is not an image, but it's an animation made on a camera that was made from a plastic film canister. So, you know, when you get a roll of film and it comes in that little plastic canister, I made a camera out of that and then shot this animation loop on it, which took ages. Using kitchen waste to develop. So I think Lizzie's doing a session on that soon. So developing, you can literally like boil pasta and then use the pasta water to develop your film. Because it's full of kind of the chemicals from when you boil the pasta. That's a really easy example. All the stuff like using seaweed gelatin instead of cow gelatin. Gelatin alternatives are notoriously difficult to work with. Repurpose, again, so this is Eileen White and one of her works. And what she does is she gets old pieces of glass and then she coats the glass with photographic emulsion and then creates her own negatives. So basically using recycled glass to create negatives. Remove, so removing harmful elements of the process. So this is probably the thing that we're most known for, which is making our own developers from plants. So typically developer, it's not super harmful developer, but fixative is probably one of the worst things in analog photography. But in this case, I made the developer out of rose bay willow herb or fireweed as it's called there. But most things work, to be honest. So, you know, aromatic plants tend to work really well. Food waste. Anyway, you've got a session going up on Here's a developer that's made from iron, so that's different to typical developer. That is a recipe for an iron developer. And then your negatives come out kind of bluish because of the iron. Here is a semi-solid developer. So that's a developer that's not a liquid, but it's a semi-solid sludge. And that's made from wood ash and coffee grounds. And basically, the interesting thing with semi-solid developer is you can kind of form it into like shapes when you develop papers. So you can have like a shape, so you can like enlarge a print. You can develop film in it as well, but it looks kind of crazy. And then you can kind of work with the developer as this like physical material if you're interested in that. Reduce, so very obvious thing reducing, but reducing the materials used. So here's some side effects printed on waste. Recycle, so obviously you should recycle, but in photography, for example, if you use analog photography, you have fixative, which extracts the silver. In this case, and then the fix is full of nano silver. So in this case, Melanie King used electrolysis to extract the silver and then refined it and turned it into jewelry. So if any of you want some sort of like side hustle, then it might be worth looking into silver extraction. Here is a sculpture that was made out of waste photographic silver. So actually kind of extracting the silver and then making this like weird three-dimensional cup. I wouldn't drink out of it though. Recycle, so very, again, obvious, but this is actually used film that is then censored. I don't know how to describe it. Basically, he's taking film that's been shot, so X-ray film in this case, and then he's actually, through a kind of bleaching process, managing to make the film light sensitive again. So this is in the very early stages of our research, but there is potential to turn shot film into reusable film. So yeah, but it's kind of a very new process. And then reimagine. So this is mine, and basically with this, it's kind of a bit more conceptual, but just thinking about like the core beliefs in photography. So, you know, the Kodak moment, everything needs to be permanent, everything needs to be lasting forever, this kind of moment frozen in time. But reimagining is just challenging these perceptions. So like, does photography need to be permanent? So this animation loop, for example, is printed with the anthotype process. So that means that it will eventually disappear. Not the actual video, although eventually. The prints that were printed have now faded away completely. And so obviously when it comes to like, you know, archival photography and all these kind of things, it's important to have permanent images. But when it comes to your own practice, just thinking like, does it need to be permanent? Because permanence is in contradiction to the fact, you know, our very biology, like we all die, we all degrade, we all turn into one food. So why does photography need to remain permanent as well? Yeah, and then you can see these kind of principles applied into our projects. So as you can see here, the photographic garden. So that's actually tobacco that's being grown there. So weirdly, tobacco grows well in Leeds. Probably Salford as well if you want to start like an illegal cigarette ring or anything. But we were growing it because it's a very powerful film developer. So then we funded 8 residents to research ideas around the photographic garden. So here's just 2 examples of the research. So a lot of them didn't actually use the garden, they did loads of weird stuff. So for example, Daisy Jacobs was growing pink oyster mushrooms because pink oyster mushrooms eat plastic. So she was growing that on waste plastic from the darkroom, a way of getting rid of new plastic, although very time consuming. Michaela Davidova was working with plants as water filtration. So basically cleaning your darkroom water by growing what are called hyperaccumulating plants. We also had a guy that made a new process out of nettles, which was weird. It looked kind of cool, I guess. Very time consuming though. We had plant-based dyes for color photography, all kinds of stuff. But there is a 4.5-hour video YouTube if you want to watch it, and that covers everybody's research. It's a kind of in-person view. Yeah, and we actually also had a guy working with digital photography, so he was building cameras out of waste digital products and then making these kind of solar-powered cameras that were only able to be triggered by non-humans as well. So they were quite crazy images that these solar-powered cameras were creating. But anyway, we are trying to work more with digital photography. And then finally, with the Sustainable Darkroom, we have this book, which is kind of 200 pages, and that is probably the most extensive collection of like writing and research on the Sustainable Darkroom. So if you guys have a copy of this university book,
it's on the way.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, this has a ton of the different processes, sources. And then here's just some resources that I think are useful that I can send you via email, but just different things like a kind of reading your arts practice guide and manifestos and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's the Sustainable Darkroom. So I got through that twice. Now I will talk about my practice, which you'll probably be like, this guy's a massive hypocrite. Okay, so change direction and talk about my practice. So when I was asked to give a talk on, I don't often get asked to give talks really, because I don't know, people who got a Sustainable Darkroom, I guess, because you get more funding for sustainable stuff, instead of just me being a narcissist and talking about myself. But yeah, so I guess I'm also going to talk about professional practice, but it's kind of weird like viewing myself as a professional because I didn't set out to do like commissions for fashion brands or anything like that, but I just kind of ended up in that position. But at the very least, I'll try and kind of chart a course for you today and how I got to that point where I'm able to actually be a full-time artist and like live off my practice and use these kind of methods that I've talked about as well. Because for a lot of you, I don't know what years you're in, you might be graduating, you might be first years, second years, but you probably have that anxiety of like, so I've done a photography degree, I'm now in £50,000 debt, like what the hell do I do with my life? And that's how I felt when I graduated. So hopefully through this, I can kind of give you some advice, basically. So there's me again, as you've seen. Yeah, so today, in an effort to cover as much ground as possible, I'll talk about how I've channeled my energy, my frustrations, my confusions with the art world, because as I said, no doubt you'll all feel similar sometimes, especially when negotiating the thought of potentially pursuing an art career. So firstly, I'll talk about my own development, my practice, and then I'll talk about my commissions, and then briefly at the end, I'll offer some like as much professional practice advice as I can give. But as I said, I just kind of fell into this a little bit. So yeah, anyway, I guess maybe I'll make this full screen. I guess I fall under this kind of cringe title of like a ecological artist or an environmental artist. And essentially this means that my practice is engaged with ecology and the environment on both a conceptual and a material level. So not just the ideas in my work, but the way that it's actually made. So my recent work, which this is a clip from Lepidoptera, and that was for the Tetley Gallery in Leeds, and that tells these parallel narratives of childhood trauma, insect extinction, specifically butterflies. So the work interweaves the life of a butterfly, archival footage of my childhood, my own experiences of post-traumatic stress disorder, and the ecological and climate crisis. All of this hand-printed using some of the techniques I've talked about. So it's around 2,600 images in total, this film. And really just trying to create this connection between the human experience, so my lived experience, and then the ecological experience, because ecology and climate crisis, like you look at the news on it, and it's just so hard to digest, and it's just so kind of scary and confusing that most people are just like, I don't want to deal with this. And so I guess in my work, I'm just trying to create ways of understanding it through my own experiences. And then the methods employed in making a lot of my works are connected to the themes. So, you know, digging up soil and oak leaves collected from the forest behind my house. All of these things which exist as this undercurrent in ecological work, as opposed to just like work about being sustainable. So I really, really don't connect with like, just personally works about, you know, being sustainable. So you know, like a video of someone recycling or whatever, everyone can kind of do that stuff. So really what interests me is like telling me something new, telling me how it feels or how scary it is, or how confused you are, not how you like religiously drive an electric vehicle or anything. So that's the kind of stuff I'm interested in, but I'm not saying you do one or the other, just personally, that's where my work tends to fall. So predictably, I can talk about how I kind of got to this point of being a full-time professional artist. So I actually started taking, there you can see a little clip of Lefty Dog Truck. So I actually started life as a dog walker. So I didn't start out as a photographer. I didn't intend to be a photographer actually. So you can see me the dog to high five. And when I was out on walks taking pictures, this was in 2012, for Facebook, I got a DSLR to take pictures of the dogs, so, you know, like high-speed pictures of like dogs catching balls and all that kind of stuff. And then I actually decided that I preferred doing the photography to the dog walking, because dog walking obviously involves a lot of, people think it's like this ideal job, but the amount of times I got like dog feces on my hands and stuff, it probably wasn't worth it. So anyway, I decided to study a BA in wildlife photography at Falmouth University, which was obviously a great financial decision. And the primary motivation for me doing this was I just didn't like know how to communicate about the kind of, because I was out all day in the hills and like walking the dogs and seeing like all this kind of ecological, like obviously compared to the stuff that's happening in the global south, not serious devastation, but seeing a lot of like ecological devastation and felling and all this kind of stuff. And it was just my way of communicating it, because I'm not very good at like science or anything like that. So photography for me really was just a way of me to try and address my own concerns around ecological crisis. And I understand this weird trajectory to go from being a dog walker to studying wildlife photography to becoming like an experimental ecological artist to then doing like commissions for Adidas and Nike stuff. But it all connects and relates. So hopefully I can give you some insight on how that can fit in your BA photography, I guess. So it was on my BA in wildlife photography that I found myself so fixated on the back of my camera, you know, the little LCD screen. So I started out doing like digital landscapes, sunsets, all that kind of stuff. And I found I was so obsessed with like that tiny little screen on the back of my camera that I wasn't even aware that I was actually like alive or like embodied in this ecosystem. Like I would be standing on the side of a cliff in Cornwall, like literally getting hit with waves and stuff. And I was just fixated on this tiny little digital reproduction of it. And then I'd go back to the editing suites, edit the photos, get them printed or put them on Flickr at the time. And I just felt so disconnected from the world around me, despite the fact I was out there taking pictures every day, that I decided I needed to like completely change up my photographic practice. And that's where I started to experiment with what we call alternative processes. So this is my first ever cyanotype. So if you don't know what a cyanotype is, it's basically a kind of 1800s process that was invented 1842, a long time ago. And a lot of my work uses these kind of historic processes where you actually have to kind of use your hands, get your hands dirty and engage with the physical world, even though you're spending a lot of time just like in a dark room and stuff. To me, I felt much more alive and much more connected to the world around me through these kind of techniques. So with alternative processes as well, it's not about the production of the perfect image. So you'll find a lot online, it's like, oh, this image is like perfectly composed and it's, but it's like a picture of a swan or something like that. And much more about experimentation and creativity and creative freedom. So for me, alternative processes was a lot more reassuring, and I very much identified with it away from the kind of mainstream photography, I guess. And I don't know why on my undergrad, but I had this like weird, in second year at least, kind of thing with fetuses, but I wasn't like, not in like a weird way or anything, but more just as a symbol of like ecological rebirth and ecological renewal and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to connect with the world and do things physically, and so that's why I started these kind of processes basically. But I began to feel increasingly limited by still photography. So I started to experiment with video works. So I was really inspired by photographers like Tyrone LeBon and Frank LeBon, who I'm actually working for now, which is this kind of weird cycle where they were one of my biggest inspirations and now I work for them. So I started kind of thinking, how can I adapt these processes into video? And I think it's really important, everyone, I don't know if you're all studying photography, but I think in this day and age especially, like I was really lucky in this kind of year to decide to start working with video, because all the commissions I've had, except maybe 2 like single covers or something like that, have been video commissions. So I've really like reinforced like learning video, learning video editing programs and just experimenting with these processes, because in this day and age, like it's really important, especially like TikTok reels, Instagram reels, all that kind of stuff. I would really put emphasis on video. So anyway, this was the first video I made. It's this weird like experimental short about a guy that's like super depressed, and then he like drowns himself in the sea, and then he like washes up on an island, and then gets kind of turned into a tree. So yeah, you can see the kind of stuff that I was working with. And the film was made entirely from pinhole cameras and then darkroom contact prints. So yeah, there you can see him being turned into a tree. Following this, I did my final BA project, which was a guide to British trees. And this is a similar narrative of a guy that's like kind of super depressed, and then he dies, and then he goes through this whole rebirth process and gets reborn as a tree at the end of the film. So yeah, very kind of BA pretentious, like taking acid for the first time kind of stuff. And he, when I was doing it, I basically wanted to show him going through these different stages of rebirth. So fire, earth, water, and air. And in doing those different processes, I wanted to make sure that in going through those different themes, so fire, air, earth, and water, I wanted to make sure the process is connected. So basically, doing stuff like burying the entire film in soil, burning the film with fire, electrocuting 35mm with electricity, submerging footage in water. So here's the first ever cyanotype animation I did for this film, and that was for the air sequence. Here's animating on wood, which is actually surprisingly easy if anyone wanted to try that. That was in this film. This is electrocuting film with electricity. So it's basically you just want to buy a static electricity generator, which you can get on eBay from China, and then you hand crank it and it shoots electricity across 2 electrodes. And this film is made from silver and gelatin. It conducts electricity. So you have to run the film through the electrodes, and then it conducts the electricity and it records the patterns of the electricity. But I would say it's quite painful, and you also need like 2 people to do it. So I had a technician helping me, and we were in one of those tiny little bays that you load film in, so literally like basically touching each other. And then he was hand cranking this thing really aggressively and shooting this electricity, and I was like pulling it through with my hands and getting shocked all the time. So it was quite intense and quite intimate. And then I don't know if they let me do it now, even though it was only 5 years ago. But I think a good rule with this kind of stuff is just it's better to ask for forgiveness instead of permission. So that was my kind of operating rule. And that's what I would potentially advise while you're here as well. Other stuff. So the film, The Guide to British Trees, like studying in Falmouth, obviously, it wasn't like going to launch you into like financial success because you're in Cornwall. But it really defined like my working with printing and photography methods as a way to create videos, as well as like all this stuff with the electricity and the fire and the soil. All of these things I've now extended into my kind of practice. So effectively, and what I find may be important for you guys, but I don't know what you want to do with your lives really. But I found a very specific niche and then continued to develop it, despite other people often telling me it was kind of pointless and a waste of time. And like, why don't I just apply like a digital mask onto these things? But fortunately, it led to what I'm doing today. So in terms of professional practice, it didn't really afford me career opportunities, but it gave me the freedom to develop these things without financial pressure. So doing my BA and stuff like that. So if you're still studying, or I guess you're all still studying, really make the use of the facilities, like learn as many techniques as possible. I know some of you have probably never done any analog stuff before, and you think, oh, I can't be asked for that. But genuinely, like, because as you graduate, you're going to have no access to this stuff, and it's going to cost you a ton just to use any of it. So use as much as you can, get out of it as much as you can. Before I graduated, I went into the darkroom, got a lot of the chemicals, and then took them home with me. I'm not saying I stole them, but choose whatever word you will. But basically, get as much out of your degree as you can in terms of techniques, because also when it comes to the commercial world, people hit me up not because I'm like great at composing stuff or great at lighting stuff, but because they want that. They want it to be like, I had a great agency message me yesterday about developing some film in plants, just so that they can then say, we developed this film in plants. And it's kind of bullshit, nonsense, sorry, for the live stream. But learning these things is super, super, super important. So just really emphasizing, like, do not underestimate the use of your facilities and the techniques while you're here, because you will regret it when you graduate. I've already talked about this, but anyway, I went to study an MA afterwards in the Royal College of Art in London. So I went straight from Cornwall to London. I'd never lived in a major city before, and I was like, Jesus, this is intense. And while I was on my MA, I did a lot of research. So I didn't actually do much image making. And that's where I kind of wrote these 2 papers when I was doing my MA. And often, like, you might think that the research is kind of a pain in the ass. I don't know if you have to write a dissertation on your courses, but even though at the time it just seemed kind of laborious, it has really helped with my career. So for example, in the MA on the right, I interviewed a bunch of artists, and one of the artists that I contacted to interview was Tyrone LeBon, who just did like Burberry's most recent campaign, all those kind of massive brands. And he agreed to be interviewed for that. And then by that connection, I'm now working for him. So it's these really kind of like indirect connections which get you into these industries. It's really weird in that way, but yeah, just pay attention and take your dissertation seriously is what I'm saying. Anyway, whilst I was there, I also met my studio mate, Alan Gardner, and we, as a result, set up Screw Gallery in Leeds. It doesn't exist at the moment because the building started collapsing while I was in Japan. But anyway, so another thing I would say with MAs, if any of you are considering doing MAs, some of you might be doing MAs already, but where you choose to study your MA is super, super important. So if you want to work in advertising photography, you want to do music videos, whatever, then an MA in Cornwall probably isn't the best place for it. So I would say BA, like learn all these skills, and then MA, try and situate yourself somewhere where the industry exists and thrives where you want to be. So that's why Even though I'd never lived in a city before and London was super intense for me, I didn't really learn much stuff on my MA, but just by being a kind of high-level institution and in a major city, I was able to make these kind of random connections that have now led to me standing here today, basically. Like, I wouldn't be stood here giving this talk if it wasn't for the fact that I'd situated myself there. So I know this sounds kind of cynical and it sounds kind of elitist, but really, if you are considering doing a further study, like, aim as high as possible and try and situate yourself in somewhere that you want to be. But if you want to ask me more about MAs or anything, feel free to ask me at the end. And as I said, work-wise, I focus mostly on research. And then following graduation, I graduated in 2020, so it was during COVID, which was awful. I was working at Battersea Dogs Home in London whilst doing my master's, and then lockdown happened, so I moved out of London back to Yorkshire, where I'm from, and we set up a studio which was until very recently known as Screw Gallery. So just by chance, there were 7 of us that didn't have a studio, and the first studio we were put in was an abandoned warehouse that was full of asbestos. So turns out they put us in a studio with disturbed asbestos, so I'm probably going to die very soon as a result, because I was the one that found it also. So then they relocated us again into this building, which is Screw Gallery. We were fortunate enough that the building was recently vacated, but I would just say in terms of this stuff, like, if you're graduating and if you've got a more fine art practice, or you've got a kind of collaborative practice, or you want to put on shows, etc., etc., it is a really good idea to kind of, especially now in the cost of living crisis and all that stuff, coming together and like doing things collaboratively. And I know photographers often like to work independently. I'm not saying that you do a duo photography project where you like one person stands there and pictures of them, but just like coming together and setting up a studio, setting up a gallery, putting on shows, the amount of networking that you'll get from that, the amount of people you'll meet is like immense and like immeasurable. It obviously might sound a bit like out of reach sometimes, but these were done through an arts charity called East Street Arts, and what they do is they let out abandoned buildings, hence why it had disturbed asbestos in, hence why this one's roof is now collapsing and we had to be vacated. But the rent was only £65 each for the 7 of us. So I don't know if there's a charity in Manchester. Sometimes they do lets in Manchester, but it's worth just contacting East Street if you're interested in something like this and saying, you know, we want an abandoned building as our studios, and the rents are usually super, super cheap, even though, you know, you're effectively, I mean, our studio had like rats and a hole in the roof, and it was awful working in there, but it increased not only the profile of the gallery, but also all our profiles as well. So there's people like now that I studied with, they've been showing in New York, they're in like some of the biggest art fairs. 2 of them have just started studying in the RCA as well. One of them's just a show in Berlin. And this was all really by virtue of us kind of banding together and doing Screw Gallery. The aim of Screw Gallery, I don't know if I've got a slide, because, you know, there you can see when we set it up, there's me in the, I shaved my head during lockdown, I looked insane. The aim with the curation of Screw was that we noticed there was a gap in the market. So Leeds, and maybe probably in Salford as well, maybe not so much in Manchester, there wasn't really anywhere aside from the big institutional galleries that showed like international work that was kind of from different subcultures. So obviously all the guys I shared with are hardcore punks. I'm obviously not hardcore punk. And so a lot of the curation was of subcultures and quite kind of like, I don't know what word to use, not aggressive, but quite kind of like confrontational stuff. Because often you'll find with regional stuff outside of London that the curation is often just stuff like, you know, oh, this is Yorkshire art for Yorkshire people, and here's a Yorkshire flag. And we don't want anyone from outside of Yorkshire showing in a Yorkshire gallery, with a very small budget that we paid for ourselves, so £200 a show. And we just got people to send work from the States. We got people to send work from Europe, send work from Japan with that £200 budget, install it, and then just show stuff that normally wouldn't have been shown. And the openings were super popular. We had like at least 100 people per show, and we were sponsored by a brewery. So if you contact like big breweries and say, oh, do you mind giving us some free cans and we'll promote you on our social media? And they used to give us like the offcuts, so the stuff they never sold. So they'd give us like 15% Star Wars themed beer and stuff. So everyone would get like completely wasted at these shows. Police turned up a couple of times, but it was fine. So yeah, again, in this case, just like recognizing a niche and working on it collectively. So if there's something you think is missing in Salford or Manchester, see if you could just get together and maybe put on a pop-up show, put on something, and you will meet people and you will create opportunities. So definitely look into it. Like, I do not regret doing Screw at all. I've just moved to London now because my partner's got a new job there. But this was like a transformative time, and it was also so cheap that I was able to develop my practice and then just sign on to universal credit in between commissions. So, you know, it kind of benefits your practice to have that kind of development period, I guess. We also applied for Arts Council funding, which is something you should all get to know. And if you don't have a session on Arts Council funding, then please organise them a session on Arts Council funding. We applied for Arts Council funding for Screw Gallery. We never received it, but 4 of us got Arts Council funding independently, so at least £10,000 each for our practice. And that's just to develop your practice. It's not to put on a big show. It's not to do anything. It's just to develop your own work. And that money has managed to keep you afloat as an artist. So do look at Arts Council funding and do not ignore it, because once you graduate, it's super, super helpful. But despite all of this, I was immediately in 2021, I'd gone back to walking dogs. I was pretty depressed and I was making like weird art films about climate change printed on soil and all that kind of stuff. But fortunately, it was here that I was offered my first commission, funnily enough, through a friend that I'd made while I was doing my master's. So it wasn't because I was this amazing genius artist or anything like that, but purely by the connections I made on my master's and literally going to like house parties with this guy repeatedly to the point that I like destroyed my brain. So again, just emphasizing that point about networking. Anyway, my first commission was offered to me through this connection that I made at the Royal College with my best mate. And he knew my work and he knew I had a particular aesthetic, but also that I was like really obsessed with music videos. So music videos are probably my favorite content, I guess, because they kind of I love like music, obviously, and not so much this song, but I love music. And then I love the kind of creative freedom that you have in music videos, I guess. And he'd been working with this really small indie label called Globe Records, and they needed a music video for this guy, Tycho Jones. That's his real name, by the way. And parents are massive Star Trek fans and something to do with Star Trek. But anyway, so I submitted a treatment. If any of you know what a treatment is, it's basically just like a proposal of what my music video would look like, on the basis that it would all be hand printed using that Cyanotype blueprint technique that I talked about. And thankfully, that was the one they chose out of all of them. They had other ones that were based on him committing suicide in the film, and him being like Scott Pilgrim in the film, and all this. But they chose this one in the end. So I quit my job as a dog walker in Leeds. I signed on to back onto Universal Credit, and then made the video over a 3-month period. So I basically just threw myself completely into this one tiny opportunity that I got offered. And yeah, I got paid £3,000 for 3 months' work, which is terrible. Obviously, that's below minimum wage, and I was working 7 days a week. But it did put me in my career in a decent position. And I guess I thought nobody's done this before, really, made a video entirely out of this process at such a high level. But if I did it, cynically, it would get me somewhere. Because I had this advice from, I don't know if you know who Mark Jenkins is, but he made the film, which won a BAFTA in 2019, I think. And he mentored me at Falmouth University, and he said nobody would watch my films if they weren't developed in coffee. And so I just thought the same thing, like nobody really cares about like a music video by this guy, unless he's like massive, like Playboy, but so how can I make something which is going to draw people in? And it sounds kind of cynical to do it in that way, but that's why I printed it all in cyanotype, and it was about 5,500 prints to make this one film, so that's why it took me 3 months. So you can see the kind of process which I showed earlier in the workshop. So firstly, this isn't really about this process, but firstly I would shoot the film on digital. So everything's shot digitally with my old dog walking camera. And then printing, so here you can see the printing stage. So I had to do about 600 of those prints on the right to make the film. So it was really intense. I'd be like waking up really early, printing, washing, developing them, etc., etc., to the point where I was actually dreaming in blue. It was horrible. And then when I pressed play on the video, I was like, this is awful. Like, I've just spent 3 months doing this and it's terrible and they're gonna want their money back. And I remember calling my mum, like, which as a 28-year-old man is quite an embarrassing experience. Calling my mum and being like, Mum, I've ruined it, like it's a disaster. But anyway, I sent it to them and they liked it, and then it turned out other people liked it. So it was then played on Piccadilly Circus as part of Days Magazine's circa competition thing that they do. It also played on Times Square in New York, and that crossing in Japan, the famous crossing in Tokyo, and also K-pop Square in Korea, if any of you are K-pop fans. And from a professional practice perspective, I would also say that it didn't come from just being like this cool, well, I don't want to call it cool because I actually don't like it, but this video that was blue and whatever, but really through a lot of kind of very deliberate promotion as well. So I made like a kind of press pack, and I'd recommend you do this with your projects. And then I was sending it out to like tons of like, crappy online photography blogs, bigger magazines, editors, social media, DMing people on Instagram, like, yo, check this video out, man. Like that kind of really cringe stuff. And it did work. So it wasn't just based on my kind of the fact that it's good, but really like, not to promote hustler culture and all that kind of stuff, but really hustling and just trying to get your stuff out there. And it's awful and it's cringe and it makes you feel like embarrassed to do it, but you do have to do it, unfortunately. And I would say as well that my rejection rate was like massive compared to the acceptance rate. So we're talking like 99 times out of 100 you get rejected from these opportunities. And that's the same for funding opportunities. Like when you graduate, apply for any opportunity that you think you can do or that's going to give you money, but you probably will get rejected and you just got to get used to rejection. Fortunately, I'm used to rejection anyway. So you can see a rejection letter that I got recently. And I get these all the time. At first, I was like, oh my God, my work's so bad, no one's ever going to like me, etc., etc. when I started getting rejected for stuff. But it's just a fact of being a professional artist is you've got to get used to rejection because you are going to get rejected way, way more than you're going to get accepted, unless you've got like really rich parents or something. So yeah, just getting used to rejection is the point. And then from that video, I was offered a bunch of stuff. So this was the first thing I was offered, which was, I guess I can play that for you if you like. Let's see. So this was for Fashion Week, and I didn't shoot this or anything. They just sent me the footage of their models, and then I put it. Well, that was half of it anyway. All right. I'll just follow that. But yeah, you can watch it on Instagram, I guess. So yeah, Fashion Week. Where's this? Anyway, we'll just do it like this. So, sorry, let's get my notes back up. So yeah, look, this one I did for free. So I didn't get paid to make this, even though it's to be in Westwood, but apparently RIP, she has a reputation for not paying people. But the thing is, like, often when you're at university, at least when I was at university, they'll say to you, don't work for free. Do not ever do anything for free. Art is valuable. And it's true, art is valuable and you should value yourself as an artist. But you've got to evaluate the opportunities individually if you're going to do them for free. So in this case, nobody knows who I am. I'm just like a weird looking guy who's like printing stuff on soil and so on. So I thought, if I can do this video, I can do a really good job of it, and then I can put it online and promote it and all that crap, then people are actually going to offer me more stuff. So just, if you are offered to do stuff for free, like, don't take a bunch of pictures of your mate's dog for free in like period costumes or something like that. But if it's something like this and it's for free, then I would suggest that you do it, but it's up to you. Dust magazine. So this was a again, like fashion thing, and it was an edit of 90s runway shows, like Prada and Tom Ford and stuff, even though I'm not a fashionable person at all. And I guess with this, again, in terms of professional practice, this was where I did actually, they tried to get me to do it for free, and I was like, no, you have to pay me. So in the end, I got £350, which is obviously hardly anything, but just demanding getting paid and negotiating that payment if you do feel comfortable at that point. This was some stuff, so I don't know why I can't go full screen, but this was some stuff I did for the NBA. So I don't know why, but a bunch of slam dunks in cyanotype, a bunch of animated slam dunks. And I guess with this, it was never released. So with commission work, like you'll do a lot of stuff which just never ever sees the light of day. And I guess you've got to get used to it. The reason this didn't get released is because they wanted us to publish it on George Floyd's death anniversary. And we were like, yeah, we're not doing that. It's like really disrespectful. And so they shelved the entire thing. This was for MAC Cosmetics. So basically, they do this lipstick, which is like raises money for HIV and AIDS. And they wanted me to do this video for the Viva Glam lipstick. And so I was basically like, asked them to send me like a ton of lipsticks. And then I was like manually drawing on the animation with the MAC lipstick, which in hindsight was probably a massive waste of that. I didn't realize how expensive MAC lipstick was. There's a point in my studio when I'm just surrounded by MAC lipstick. So I was also only had a 2-day turnaround for this video. So I had like, I was literally sleeping in my studio, which was like an abandoned building with a hole in the roof. So like in a sleeping bag, just like drawing lipstick on prints. Like, I mean, what the heck am I doing in my life? To the point where you like think like, oh, maybe I'll just try it now. But yeah, so what's it, Silence of the Lambs or something. But yeah, anyway, I guess the thing from a professional practice perspective of this project is like being like a lot of my work deals with animal rights, and I'm a vegan and all that kind of annoying stuff. And I guess from this perspective, it's just stuff that's kind of ethically questionable because MAC still tests on animals in Asia, but stuff that's also going to pay rent. So I think I got $2.5 for this, and then also stuff that's going to improve your standing as an artist. So I don't know. It's up to you. I don't normally talk about this one because I'm a bit embarrassed of it. But anyway, Adidas. So Adidas asked me to do a really short animation for their blue originals. The blue and white thing that they have. And that was actually a good experience. I've worked with in Westwood, Nike and Adidas in terms of big fashion brands. Nike was horrific. Adidas was actually good. So if you're going to buy clothes, buy Adidas, I guess. But yeah, so I did this short cyanotype animation, and then they installed it in their Oxford Street store. And the main professional practice thing from this was just negotiating a higher fee, because I think they wanted to do it for 1,000 £500, and I was like, come on, man, yeah, Adidas. Like, you've got factories of children all around the world making your shoes, and you can't pay me, So I managed to get 3,000, because artists don't like to talk about money, but it is really important to talk about money. I managed to get £3,250. So also not a huge amount when you've got to pay your rent and stuff, but just, if it's someone like this, just think about negotiating higher fees. Obviously, if it's like a tiny independent, like vegan farm cafe, then maybe not a good idea to press them for more money. But if it's something like this, then I would say you've got a good chance of getting more money out of them. Also, another thing to look up is this isn't about Daily Paper, but Artist Union England have a page on their website that's rates of pay. So whenever people ask me for my rates of pay now, I just refer them to the Artist Union England page, and then I'm not even a member of Artist Union England, but by virtue of me just sending them that page, they think that I'm a member of a union as well. So then they're like, oh shit, if we mess about this guy, he's gonna bring the Artist Union down on us, which is obviously not a great threat to the Artist Union. But anyway, just if you need rates and you're confused about rates, and then people are like, oh, if you multiply this and then you add this decimal point, forget about that. Just go on the Artist Union page and look at their rates and use those. And they have them for different years of experience as well. So for recent graduates, 3 years, 5 years, etc. Daily Paper, it's a Dutch fashion brand. I guess from this, similarly, same director as Nike, just working with like difficult directors and like having to grit your teeth. Like, I'm not going to say who it was, but it was like probably one of the worst professional. It was the worst professional experience of my life. This also never got published because the director, he was like taking a lot of drugs, like throughout the entire. I mean, this is being live streamed, isn't it? But how many people are watching? Like 5 people or something. Yeah. Anyway, we're doing this thing for a famous footballer that you may know. You probably will know even if you don't like football. And we followed this football, although I didn't. I was just sat in my bloody abandoned studio in Leeds, following this footballer through the US. So he was doing this US tour to promote his book, shooting all this footage on 16mm and then sending it to me and some other creatives and doing all these re-edits and reprints. And there was one point where I was on Zoom to the director, and they were based in Portland, which is in Oregon, which is the West Coast, so like above LA, different state to LA, but same time zone, I think. And for me, it was like 4 a.m. and I'm in my sleeping bag on Zoom, and then the director's off camera shouting like, "I'm not on coke, I'm not on coke." And I was just like, at the Nike managers, and I was just sat there like, oh my God, like what the hell am I doing? And then you come back and be like, oh, can you just reprint those pictures of the footballer for me on grass? And I was like, like 4 a.m. So anyway, that was like the worst experience of my career, definitely. I was going to include these stills that I did for Megan Thee Stallion, and where they asked me to, they also didn't get published yet. But I didn't include them because they're a bit explicit. But they asked me to make it look like a fake, onto the pictures. So I've got on my hard drive just all these pictures of. It makes me look like some sort of freak. I'm just like downloading stills of Megan Thee Stallion and then onto them and keeping them on my hard drive. So if I ever get not that I would get my hard drive searched by the police, but if I did, they'd find some questionable pictures of Megan Thee Stallion. But unsurprisingly, they never got published. And it was a mixture of just PVA glue and just PVA glue, I think. And then I just put it in a pipette and then just fired it. But I didn't include those because, we're live streaming. So. Anyway, I've done a ton of. I did these whole series of prints for P. Diddy's Bodyguard, which was just like, just ridiculous. And I was like, what am I doing in my life? Even though it sounds kind of interesting, it's like, I don't know. I got kind of sick of it. And then music video, which is shown in quite a lot of festivals now, which was using AI and then analog printing combined, was for a subsidiary of Warp Records. Warp Records, like Aphex Twin, Flying Lotus, loads of famous artists, and it was for this Japanese musician who does like Japanese techno. And I guess this was a really small fee. This was only £1,000 for a 5-minute music video, but because it was a subsidiary of Warp and he's connected to like, you know, Flying Lotus and big musicians, I was like, I may as well just do it anyway, even though it's such a small amount of money because of that connection. So again, just keep in mind the connections to even if you're getting paid really bad amounts. I don't know why I put this in. Yeah, so okay, I'll talk about this. I mean, the most recent commission I've been doing is this, in terms of commissions. So this is my longest film yet. It's a half-an-hour documentary for, as I mentioned, Tyrone, and it's an experimental documentary on the Sustainable Darkroom. So it's not kind of like, ooh, like kind of everyone in a, you know, it's not like some hippie thing. It's like very weird and experimental. But yeah, so that's coming out in November or January, I think. It's coming out, the film they're releasing before it, so it's in a series, the Really and Truly series, really spelled R-E-E-L-Y, like a film reel. And it's all about different photographers, famous photographers. So I'd recommend watching the original that was shot by Tyrone, the Really and Truly series, and it's got photographers like Iraqi and Tel, really famous photographers. Really good film. And now he's commissioned other people to make these shots. And so the first one is like made with Harmony Korine, who, if you know him, he directed like Spring Breakers, and anyway, he's like a Hollywood film director. So the film that he's done's got like, they sent me a preview of the website, and the film he's done's got like Snoop Dogg and Jonah Hill and Matthew McConaughey in it, and then there's mine next to it. It's just a picture of a cow. So yeah, it's kind of weird that these things get placed in these areas, I guess. So I've left it out, but most of my commissions have come through social media. I don't know if I actually did anything. I think it's towards the end. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. So hopefully you can notice that despite the fact of what I started the talk off about with the Sustainable Darkroom being this quite like anti-capitalist, anti-consumer narrative, and then me being like a complete sellout, hopefully you can notice that I've tried to retain like a shred of integrity within my own work. So using these commissions to then fund my own practice, although not very often because my work takes so long. Like these processes are so time intensive that I don't get that much time to do my own work, but throughout I kind of maintain my own practice, and it tends to be about ecology, but not from a scientific perspective, just more from an emotional perspective. So this film, Here Comes the Wildfire, was about wildfires in the British uplands and the way that the British uplands are managed in reference to wildfires. So I'm from a rural farming area. My uncle's a sheep farmer, that kind of stuff. So that most of my practice revolves around that, and that was printed by hand in the sun during lockdown. Yorkshire Dirt, so this is a film that's printed entirely on soil. I think my internet's working, but I'll show you a bit. But that's about violence in rural ecosystems. The wildfire, actually, I don't really like it, but it won a Channel 4 award, so there you go. Yorkshire Dirt, it's printed entirely on soil, and it's about violence in the non-humans in rural spaces, so fox hunting, shooting, animal agriculture, the dairy industry, all of these things which I'm very much a part of, coming from a kind of farming background, but being critical of them. And then I basically dug up a bunch of soil from my home area and then printed the entire film on the soil and then scanned it back. It was a nightmare. I wouldn't recommend doing it. But if you are interested, I can teach you how to do it if you really want to do it. Lepidoptera, which was a commission for the Tetley, which I mentioned, which is about trauma and butterflies. Weird connection there. Dogs on Fire. So this is a film that I made on a residency in Scotland. I'll talk about residencies in a sec. This film was about displaced violence in the meat trade. So I was reading this article about how in the Amazon, where they clear cut to rear cows for cheap meat in places like Sainsbury's microwave meals, they often employ paramilitary groups to clear the indigenous people off the land with violence. And I was reading an eyewitness testimony that said that one of the ways they would do it is set all their buildings on fire and their cars and their houses on fire, and then they would hold them at gunpoint whilst they then threw their dogs onto the fire alive to intimidate them. So the film is about that, and it's printed entirely on Amazon packaging that was taken out of a bin. So I was on this residency just like going in the bins all the time, getting packaging out and printing it. Return of the Wolf, which was this film about wolf conservation in America, and that was projected on Denver Clock Tower. So kind of like Big Ben in Denver, I guess. I don't know why they thought an experimental animation would promote wolf conservation, but there you go. I talked about that. And then most recently, I've been in Japan for 3 months. So I just recently got back from a residency in Japan. So if you don't know what an art residency is, basically it's where an arts organization will don't apply for residencies where they make you pay. By the way, that's just a scam. So good residencies, they will pay you to go there. So in this case, it was with an organization called TOCAS, Tokyo Arts and Space, and they do something called an international creative residency. So they fly you out there, pay for your flights, you get an apartment for 3 months, you get a studio for 3 months, and they also paid me like 700,000 yen or something, which isn't actually that much, about $4,000. And then I was just making work in Japan for 3 months and doing a lot of stuff. And while I was there, I was researching the kitsune, which is the fox myth. So Japan still has very strong links to kind of nature worshipping and stuff like that. So I was researching, because I'm really interested in foxes, as you can see with my browser there. And I was researching the fox myth. So if you go to a lot of Shinto, which traditional Japanese temples, you'll see that they have these fox statues, and I was kind of uncovering what they represent and what they could represent in the 21st century. And then I did this little open studio, but next year there's be a full exhibition, so they also fly you out the year after to do an exhibition. So it's a pretty sweet deal, and there's lots of opportunities. Like, they're very competitive, but again, I would recommend lobbying your tutors to put on a section on applications and applying for residencies and stuff, because this was my 4th residency. All of them paid. I'm doing one in Finland in November, so 2 months in Finland in the middle of nowhere, in like a hut without any. And for that, it's, I think, 7,250 euros for 2 months. So some of these can be really well paid, and then you just get to freely make art or do photography or whatever. And a lot of the artists that were on it, like, I'm not saying the work was bad. I'm just saying that some of it wasn't great. So like, you do have a good chance. Especially TOCAS don't get that many applications compared to other ones. So when I made the Dogs on Fire film with the Amazon packaging, that was a residency called Cove Park in Scotland, and that's a really good residency, really well paid, but they get about 1,500 applications, and they only select about 10 people. So whereas this, they only got 100 applications. So anyway, the thing I would recommend is making like a boilerplate application. So the term boilerplate, just like a template application that has all your interest and themes, and then just adapting it to the residency. It saves you so much time. I just send stuff off constantly. I recently applied for an arts bursary from a charity called SANE, which is like artists with mental health problems. I'm not laughing because I don't have mental health problems, but I mean, like, it's just crazy that there's all these kind of niche things that people don't really know about, especially when they graduate. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. But yeah, the good thing about residencies, so typically only do paid residencies unless someone's paying you externally to do it. So sometimes they will pay you externally. So like the guy with the pink hair at the back, He was being paid by a university to be there. He's not a student, he's a tutor. The other guy, Akiem, he was just like old Rastafarian from Barbados. He was a legend. And he absolutely loved baking, so he baked us that Bakewell tart while I was on residency. But the good things about these residencies are they're paid, they're really good for networking. So I'm still friends with like some of these people because you're forced into not a room, like you're forced to live with these people for months on end. So obviously it can go badly sometimes, but in my experience, it's gone well. And then finally on that, just if any of you do have work related to ecology, check out the NARCA Alliance, which is a bunch of residencies that are about climate change and funded. There's one in the Arctic, I think, or the Svalbard. So if you're into that. Right, where am I? Gotten a bit off track here. Very quickly, professional practice, because I know you probably don't want to listen to me talk too much longer. So networking and social media. So I recently did some one-to-ones with students in a Leeds Beckett, and one of the students didn't have a website, he didn't have Instagram. And I understand it, like this stuff is very addictive, it's very toxic, it's bad for your mental health, etc., etc. But if you're an artist, like it just is like super important to get your work out there. Like you might be amazing artist, really talented, but if you're not letting yourself be seen, then you're just going to die in obscurity. There's probably thousands of artists that are not good at promoting themselves. I only spend about 50% of my time, if that, actually making art. The rest of it's all the other stuff around it, the accounting, the promotion, the social media, the shameless net. I mean, I don't do so much of that networking anymore. So yeah, it's really cringe, but just try and do it. So you can see one of my kind of cringe interactions. So someone followed me, I think it was like King Cruel's photographer or something. And then I just DM'd him like, nice work, bro. And then he was like, yeah, your work's dope, let's connect on something. And it's awful, and like, you feel like a total, swear word. But you just do have to do it. And it has really helped my career doing that. But, you might have to do it. But yeah, just don't underestimate the kind of need for networking, unfortunately. Also, as I said, situating yourself. So I didn't make this infographic, but as you can see, like 33% of all creative jobs are in London. And then what have you got second to that? Manchester with Manchester, where we are now, I guess 7.5%. So that's a massive drop. But obviously Manchester is probably the second best place for you guys to be situated. But if I hadn't gone to London and done all that stuff in London, and even now, like I've just moved back to London and I've only been there for like a week, 2 weeks, and I've already been offered like 3 music videos that I wouldn't have been offered if I wasn't there, just by like going out and reconnecting with people that I used to know. So yeah, it's cynical and it's awful, but unfortunately the way that the Conservatives and Labour to some extent have economically funded this country, everything is concentrated in the south. It's changing a bit slowly. But anyway, in Manchester, Village Books is a good place to check out. I'm friends with those guys. Definitely go to their openings. The Village Books Gallery, they're a photo book gallery. Go to their openings. That's another thing about networking. Like if there's a gallery you really like, if there's a photo book publisher you really like, if there's a filmmaker you really like, go to their screenings, go to their openings. They will get to know you, and then they will, and then it just increases your chances of them being like, oh, can I see your work? And then you show them your nicely curated Instagram, nice installation shots and stuff, and then they're gonna increase your potential to get a show. So you really have to be present at these things to get anywhere. It's exhausting, but it is the reality, unfortunately. As I said, with rejection, again, just reinforcing that. So get used to being rejected. If you look like me, you're probably used to being rejected anyway, but get used to rejection in the professional world as well. And as I said, work collectively. Another thing I'd add to this that is not actually in the presentation is really like get good with money management. because they don't teach it at school, they don't teach you at university, and you graduate and you're like, what the hell is like, how do I get a pension? All this kind of stuff. It's really important to like work out your cash flow, what's coming in, what's going out, and then being able to say, okay, if I spend this amount of time in the studio, so 2 days in my studio, I have this much money to do that, and then I have this much money to do that project. It just really helps. It's kind of lame, but there's a free money management course from Money Saving Expert on the Open University. So maybe check that out if you really want to get into like managing your money. But seriously, don't underestimate, unless you're rich and you've got rich parents, which does happen a lot at art school and stuff. But if you're not rich, get on top of like your finances, because it's super, super, super important. It's not stressed enough. Even if you just have to work some BS job to fund your practice, like you got to do what you got to do, you know. Work collectively, as I said, with Screw Gallery, and then finally, just like identifying niche and trends. So this is, I wouldn't say friend, Instagram friend of mine, Harry Sung. So he started as a photographer, started doing mixed media animation, which is really a trend at the moment with Gen Z. So mixed media animation just means like where they print stuff out and then they like draw over the frames, and he's really, really good at it. And now he's like, and then he made a TikTok with his animations, and now he's got like thousands of followers, and he's done music videos for like, who was someone really famous recently? So like, and he did a workshop with me like years ago, and then he took those techniques and then turned it into his own thing and identified that trend, and now he's actually in London at the moment, but he's making like bare cash from it. So just identify those things. Like I said, especially still image making, really try and learn some video making. Like maybe again, if you course leaders, course tutors, put on video making sessions, because you cannot underestimate the importance of video in this day and age. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much for that. That was brilliant. Just for the last things that I want to registration purposes, you need this number.
If anyone has any questions, they can ask me here at the desk. Feel free. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of ground to cover. The Sustainable Darkroom, and
I think it's that bit about the thing at the end where you said about residences and stuff.
Yeah.
Actually,
yeah.
But we already bring in stuff about costing and stuff right to the.
Going to sand round the traditional sheet of paper.
It's saying it's already ended now, so that's fine.
What?
The code.
Is there anybody here who's not
Already ended.
not fit?
Okay. So we need to put on. We need to.
Sand round some
Oh,
paper.
right.
Yes. Has anybody got any questions for Ed before?
For sanitize, usually cartridge paper. When it comes to the mixed media stuff, so like what he's doing, but I do quite a bit of that now as well. I just use recycled paper.